Good evening. Good evening, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. I'm Jackie Kemp. I'm a journalist and writer, and I have a Substack at Substack Jackie Kemp called A Letter from Scotland. Right, we're just going to go through the news of today. We're going to start with the Ukraine update, day 635. President Zelensky has dismissed Major General Tetiana Otoshenko, the commander of the military's medical forces. Zelensky said new priorities had been set in the operation of Ukraine's military after a meeting with Defense Minister Rustem Umerov. The Ukrainian army said it had Russian forces back 3 to 8 kilometers from the banks of Dnipro River, which, if confirmed, would be the first meaningful advance by Kiev's forces months into a disappointing counteroffensive. Ukrainian and Russian forces have been entrenched on opposite sides of the vast waterway in the southern Kherson region for more than a year, after Russia withdrew its troops from the western bank last November. A Ukrainian teenager who'd been taken to Russia from the occupied city of Mariupol during the war has returned to Ukraine on his 18th birthday. Bohdan Yermakin, who turned 18 on Sunday, had appealed to President Zelensky this month to help bring him back to Ukraine. About 3,000 mostly Ukrainian trucks, including those carrying fuel and humanitarian aid, were stuck on the Polish side of the border on Sunday due to a more than 10-day blockade by Polish truckers, Ukrainian authorities said. Polish truckers earlier this month blockaded roads to 3 border crossings with Ukraine to protest against what they see as government inaction over a loss of business to foreign competitors since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Air defense units in Moscow intercepted a drone targeting the city late Sunday, Mayor Sergei Sobyanin said. No casualties or damage were initially reported. Air defenses had also thwarted a drone attack on the Russian capital overnight to Sunday, authorities said earlier. The Ukrainian military has said that Russia launched 20 Iranian-made shaded drones overnight to Sunday, targeting Kiev and the Cherkasy and Poltava regions. 15 of the drones were shot down. The overnight strikes on Kiev were the second attack on the Ukrainian capital in 48 hours. Ukrainian Interior Minister Ihor Kolimenko has said that 5 people, including a 3-year-old girl, were injured in Russian artillery shelling of Kherson on Sunday morning. Pro-war nationalist Igor Girkin, who is in custody awaiting trial for inciting extremism, said he wanted to run for president, even though he understood the March election would be a sham, with the winner already clear. Girkin, a former Federal Security Service FSB officer who helped Russia to annex Crimea in 2014, has repeatedly said Russia faces revolution and even civil war unless President Vladimir Putin's military top brass fight the war in Ukraine more effectively. Israel and Gaza latest. Israel and Hamas appear to be edging towards a deal that would see the release of a significant number of hostages, possibly in return for a limited ceasefire and the release of Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails. Senior US and Israeli officials, as well as the Qatari Prime Minister, all suggested that an agreement was close on Sunday, although observers have cautioned that public statements during such negotiations are often misleading and any potential deal could easily collapse. President Biden has said he believes a deal to secure the release of hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza is near. The president was answering a question by a reporter while at a turkey pardoning ceremony at the White House on Monday. Israel's Haaretz says it has been told by a source involved in the negotiations with Hamas that the organization is considering increasing the number of hostages it is willing to release. Relatives of some of the estimated 240 people held by Hamas in Gaza urged far-right Israeli government not to pursue proposed capital punishment for captured Palestinian militants, saying that even talk of doing so might endanger the hostages. At least 13,000 Palestinians have been killed and 30,000 injured by Israeli strikes across Gaza since 7th of October, the Gaza Health Ministry has reported. The death toll, they say, includes 5,600 children and 3,550 women. There are reports of heavy fighting around the Indonesian hospital in the north of the Gaza Strip. Marwan Abdallah, a medical worker there, said Israeli tanks were visible from the windows. Health Ministry officials in Gaza say 12 people have been killed, including doctors and patients. The head of the World Health Organization, WHO, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, has said that he is appalled by reports of an attack on the Indonesian hospital in Gaza. Indonesian Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi on Monday condemned Israel's reported attack on the Indonesian hospital in Gaza. 28 premature Palestinian babies that had been evacuated from the Al-Shifa hospital in northern Gaza have been transported via the Rafah border crossing into Egypt, where they will receive further medical aid. The move was coordinated by the Palestine Red Crescent Society with the World Health Organization and the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA. Dozens of trucks entered the Gaza Strip from Egypt with equipment from Jordan to set up a field hospital. Jordan's state-run media said the hospital on the southern town of Khan Yunis would be up and running within 48 hours. Israel's military has released security camera footage it says shows hostages being brought into Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City on the 7th of October after being kidnapped during Hamas's attacks on southern Israel. It has not been possible to verify the footage independently. The IDF reports that it has lost 66 soldiers in total during the war since the 7th of October. Yemen's Houthi rebels have seized a British-owned and Japanese-operated cargo ship in the Red Sea. The Houthi rebels claimed it was an Israeli vessel. I think there weren't any Israelis aboard. I think that was denied by Israel. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will host a meeting in Moscow on Tuesday to discuss the situation in Gaza with foreign ministers from members of the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. So that's the war updates over. So that's something. Rishi Sunak planning tax cuts. In a speech today, Rishi Sunak hinted at tax cuts for business as he promised to reduce the tax burden carefully and sustainably and over time. The Prime Minister declined to give any specifics before the autumn statement, but stressed the focus was very much the supply side of the economy, in a signal that business tax cuts are more likely than personal ones. The Prime Minister said that the UK government would take 5 long-term decisions as part of the next phase of the government's economic plan after a fall in inflation to 4.6% in October. He listed them as reducing debt, cutting tax, rewarding hard work, building domestic and sustainable energy, backing British business, and delivering world-class education. Sunak said the UK government would attempt to grow the economy through the dynamism of the private sector. As Hunt and a range of other ministers listened in the front row, Sunak used the speech to hint at business tax cuts to boost economic growth, as he promised to reduce taxes carefully and sustainably. After the speech, to an audience of local business and community leaders, Sunak said the welfare system was not sustainable when asked about a possible squeeze on welfare payments in the autumn statement. Declining to preempt any announcements on Wednesday, the Prime Minister said, "Our view on the welfare system is that it should be compassionate, it should be fair, and it should be sustainable." The Chancellor has been accused of making the most vulnerable pay for tax cuts for the wealthy in a proposed crackdown on welfare payments and associated benefits ahead of the autumn budget. The proposals could result in thousands of people being cut off from accessing crucial benefits such as free prescription and dental treatment, as well as help from energy suppliers. Following reports that the UK Treasury are planning to hit the Scottish whisky industry with a 15% duty rise, costing around £100 million in 2023-24, the SNP has urged the UK government to commit to ruling out any further duty increases on Scottish whisky and instead invest and protect the long-term future of the industry. Scottish whisky is the world's #1 internationally traded spirit, with exports reaching $6.2 billion in 2022, accounting for 25% of all UK food and drink exports, 77% of Scottish food and drink exports, and supporting more than 10,000 jobs in Scotland. Commenting, the SNP's business and trade spokesperson Richard Thompson said, "Once again, we are witnessing Scotland's fantastic whisky industry being disproportionately impacted by a UK government we did not vote for." The EU EFA Green Group leader says independent Scotland will be welcomed back with open arms. Following the Scottish Government's launch of their Building a New Scotland, an Independent Scotland in the EU paper on Friday, the co-chair of the European Greens European Free Alliance Group in the European Parliament has said that an independent Scotland will be welcomed back into the EU with open arms. Terry Reinke, a German Green MP, confirmed her support and that of many other MEPs for Scotland joining the European Union. Responding to the launch of the Scottish Government paper, Ms Reinke said, The question on the independence of Scotland is for the people in Scotland to decide, and I will not take a position on it. However, if Scotland were to become an independent country, they would be welcomed back with open arms into the European Union. Ms. Reinke said that an independent Scotland would have to pass the same process as other candidate states. But since Scotland previously applied for the full acquis, she expected that this process would go much faster. She added the people of Scotland could count on my and many other MEPs' support in this process. Ahead of COP28, the UN warns that the world is facing a hellish 3 degrees of climate heating. Ahead of the crucial COP28 climate summit that begins next week in the United Arab Emirates, a UN report has warned that the world is on track for a hellish 3 degrees centigrade of global heating. The report found that today's carbon-cutting policies are so inadequate that 3 degrees of heating would be reached this century. Temperature records have already been obliterated in 2023, and intensifying heat waves, floods and droughts have taken lives and hit livelihoods across the globe in response to a temperature rise of 1.4 degrees centigrade to date. Scientists say far worse is to come if temperatures continue to rise. The Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, has said repeatedly the world is heading for a hellish future. The UN Environment Programme UNEP report said that implementing future policies already promised by countries would shave 0.1 degrees centigrade off the 3 centigrade limit. Putting in place emissions cuts pledged by developing countries on condition of receiving financial and technical support would cut the temperature rise to 2.5 degrees centigrade, still a catastrophic scenario. To get on track for the internationally agreed target of 1.5 degrees centigrade, 22 billion tonnes of CO2 must be cut from the currently projected total in 2030, the report said. That is 42 degrees of global emissions and equivalent to the output of the world's 5 worst polluters: China, US, India, Russia and Japan. Guterres said present trends are racing our planet down a dead-end 3-degree temperature rise. This is a failure of leadership, a betrayal of the vulnerable, and a massive missed opportunity. Renewables have never been cheaper or more accessible. We know it is still possible to make the 1.5 degree limit a reality. It requires tearing out the poisoned root of the climate crisis, fossil fuels. He added, leaders must drastically up their game now with record ambition, record action, and record emissions reductions. No more greenwashing, no more foot dragging. Guterres said countries must commit at COP28 to triple renewable energy capacity by 2030 and to phasing out fossil fuels with a clear time frame. He said the recent climate agreement between China and the US was a positive step, but that much more needs to be done to restore trust between developed and developing countries after broken promises on delivering billions of dollars of climate aid. The UN report, pointedly titled Broken Record, said that if all the long-term pledges by countries to cut emissions to net zero by about 2050 were achieved, then the global temperature rise could be limited to 2 degrees centigrade. However, it concluded that these net zero pledges are not currently considered credible. None of the G20 countries, which together produce 80% of CO2, are reducing emissions at a pace consistent with their net zero targets, it said. The Home Office reverses decision to deport Egyptian student in need of medical treatment to Scotland. Yusuf Mikhail, an Egyptian student who has a rare genetic disorder that cannot be treated in his home country, says he now has hope for the future after the Home Office reversed its decision to deport him. Mr. Mikhail, who lives in Glasgow, was due to be deported in June, but the removal was postponed after being blocked by the Court of Session in Edinburgh. He had been held at Dungavel House Detention Centre in Lanarkshire for 2 weeks in May and June. He's now been granted leave to remain until April 2026, with officials saying they would exercise discretion in view of his exceptional circumstances. Mr. Mikhail has Fabry disease, an inherited condition in which enzymes cannot break down fatty materials, known as lipids, allowing them to build up in the body and damage the heart, kidneys and nervous system. Without treatment, which is available in the UK, Mikhail's lifespan is likely to be shortened. According to evidence from Egyptian doctors, being deprived of treatment for Fabry disease would cause Mikhail intense suffering or death. A letter sent by officials at Misr International Hospital in Egypt confirmed that the country's drug authorities do not provide the medicine Migaslat, which is used to treat the disease in Scotland. Far-right libertarian Javier Milei wins Argentina's presidential election. Javier Milei, the volatile far-right libertarian who has vowed to exterminate inflation and take a chainsaw to the state, has been elected president of Argentina, catapulting South America's second-largest economy into an unpredictable and potentially turbulent future. With more than 99% of votes counted, Milei, who's often compared to Donald Trump, has secured 55.7% of the vote, compared with 44.3% for his rival, the centre-left finance minister Sergio Massa. Pro-Milei activists rejoiced at the triumph of their 53-year-old leader, whom they describe as an economic visionary poised to lead Argentina out of one of the country's worst economic crises in decades. Milei promised drastic changes to tackle Argentina's soaring inflation and widespread poverty. He also sent a message to the international community: Argentina will return to the place in the world which it should never have lost. During his campaign, Milei, who will take office on the 10th of December, vowed to abolish the central bank and dollarize the economy in order to overcome a financial collapse that has left 40% of Argentina's 45 million citizens in poverty and pushed inflation to more than 140%. Milei's victory was celebrated by other big beasts of the global far right, including Brazil's former president Jair Bolsonaro. Donald Trump wrote, "The whole world was watching. I am very proud of you. You will turn your country around and truly make Argentina great again." His victory was also celebrated by X's owner Elon Musk, who posted, "Prosperity is ahead for Argentina." Milei's opponents reacted with shock and dejection to the election of a notoriously erratic figure whose radical ideas include legalizing the sale of organs, cutting ties with Argentina's two biggest trade partners, Brazil and China, and closing more than a dozen ministries. Milei is a climate-denying populist who's known by the nickname El Loco, the Madman. He has also enraged millions of Argentinians by questioning the four-decade consensus over the crimes of its 1976 to 83 dictatorship, during which an estimated 30,000 people were killed by the military regime. His vice presidential running mate is Victoria Nuland, an ultra-conservative congresswoman who's also played down the dictatorship's crimes. The Scottish Government launches a new benefit for unpaid carers. The pilot phase of a new benefit that will be paid to over 80,000 carers has begun in Scotland. Unpaid carers in Perth and Kinross, Dundee City and Elan Sear, Western Isles, are the first to be able to apply for carer support payment. The benefit is replacing carers allowance, currently delivered by the Department for Work and Pensions in Scotland. Carers in more local authority areas will be able to apply from spring next year as part of the phased rollout. The benefit will be available nationally by autumn 2024. Carer support payment was designed with carers to offer them a better experience than carers allowance. This includes providing information to carers to help them access wider support and extending the eligibility criteria to let full-time students apply. Around 1,500 more people across Scotland are expected to be eligible for carer support payment as a result. The pilot phase will allow Social Security Scotland to put the new approach into practice. Learnings will be used to shape the rollout of the benefit across Scotland. Carers in Scotland who get carers allowance will have their awards transferred to carer support payment starting from February next year. Social Justice Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville said, "The Scottish Government is working hard to support households in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Carer support payment, which supports carers who have the most intensive caring roles and the lowest earnings, is part of our mission to reduce poverty. We have expanded the eligibility criteria so that 1,500 people who couldn't get carers allowance because they studied full-time can get carer support payment. We've also made it easier to apply. A huge amount of work has been done to create a benefit system that better meets the needs of carers who play a vital role in the lives of the people they look after and their community. This pilot phase allows us to put our new approach into practice, learning and improving ahead of the benefit beginning its phased rollout from spring next year. I urge anyone in the pilot areas who think they may be eligible for carer support payment to check if they are entitled, and if so apply. Carers living in other parts of Scotland should still apply for carers allowance." The Scottish Government to launch a paper on the marine sector in an independent Scotland. The eighth paper in Building a New Scotland series, Our Marine Sector in Independent Scotland, will be published by Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs, Land Reform and Islands, Mary Goodwin, tomorrow. The paper, which says that independence would allow Scotland's marine sector to realise its full potential, sets out proposals for how the marine sector would thrive and grow in an independent Scotland. The paper follows from the publication of An Independent Scotland in the EU on Friday, November 17th, which set out the benefits for an independent Scotland to rejoin the EU, giving access to the world's biggest single market, reduced barriers to trade, free movement of people, and access to an equitable share of EU funding. Ms. Goujon said, Scotland is a proud maritime nation, and our marine sector is a national asset, but it's only with the full powers of independence that we can unlock its full potential. Brexit has significantly impacted Scotland's marine sector, creating major barriers to trade, reducing access to labour, and a loss of fishing opportunities for parts of our fleet. As an independent EU member state, Scotland would for the first time be able to negotiate for its own priorities at the heart of Europe. I look forward to publishing our paper and setting out how independence can help to address the current challenges in our marine sector and benefit our people, communities, economy and environment. The Scottish Government's Energy Minister in Belgium to promote Scotland's hydrogen. The Scottish Government's Minister for Energy and the Environment, Gillian Martin, is to tell a conference in Brussels about the key role Scotland can play in meeting the growing demand for green hydrogen in Europe. In her visit to Belgium over European Hydrogen Week, Ms. Martin will deliver a keynote speech at a high-level policy conference attended by leaders in the energy sector. She will also take part in a discussion on the well-being economy and conclude the two-day visit with a tour of the port of Antwerp-Bruges and a meeting with leading ScotWind partner DEME Group. Ahead of her visit, Ms. Martin said, "We want to work in partnership with our European neighbours to accelerate the transition to green energy, and this trip is an opportunity to highlight the contribution Scotland could make to the EU's energy and climate ambitions. Scotland is well placed in terms of proximity and infrastructure, with the potential to produce over 3 million tonnes of green hydrogen per year by 2045, including up to 2.5 million tonnes for export. To realise this vision, we're currently developing a hydrogen sector export plan, which will be published early next year. We have already signed a number of international agreements on hydrogen, including with Denmark, Occitania and German states, and we're keen to progress more. I look forward to cementing existing relationships with European partners and developing new ones to show what Scotland can do for the green revolution." The Glasgow University report says UK government severely lagging behind heat pump targets. A report by the University of Glasgow-based UK Collaborative Centre for Housing Evidence exposes the intricate challenges hindering the adoption of heat pumps in the UK. Only 55,000 installations are occurring yearly as of mid-2023, considerably behind the UK government's annual target of 600,000. The report dissects the complexities contributing to this disparity between government targets and installations, before presenting a range of systemic solutions for a more sustainable transition. Heat pumps are a cornerstone of the UK government's decarbonisation agenda. The electrification of domestic heating, underwritten by the installation of ground air and water source heat pumps, is expected to reduce the UK's greenhouse gas emissions by around 15 to 17%. Report author Dr. Nicholas Harrington emphasises the urgency of addressing the critical issues outlined in the study, saying, "This report reveals the nuanced web of challenges affecting the widespread adoption of heat pumps in the UK. By understanding the feedback loops and barriers identified, we can tailor effective policy interventions. Crucially, the relative pricing of electricity to gas emerges as a pivotal factor. If we can address this dynamic, we open the door to a more seamless and cost-effective transition to sustainable heating solutions." The Scottish Government expands free mediation services. Free mediation services for people involved in civil disputes are being expanded to cover all of Scotland. The service offers those who are eligible an opportunity to negotiate a mutually acceptable resolution to their civil dispute, reducing the stress, cost and time of going through a court process. Mediation hubs already exist in 22 Sheriff Court areas. 18 are delivered by the University of Strathclyde Mediation Clinic and 4 by Edinburgh CAB Mediation Service. The expansion will see the University of Strathclyde Mediation Clinic open a further 17 hubs across the country. Free mediation services, backed by more than £250,000 of Scottish Government funding in 2023-24, are available for civil disputes involving sums of up to £5,000, with hundreds of cases referred to the hubs every year. Examples of such disputes include those involving goods and services, building work, unpaid bills, employment and vehicle disputes. Victim and Community Safety Minister Siobhan Brown said, "Civil disputes, especially when they end up in court, can be costly and time-consuming for those involved and can affect individuals, communities and organisations. Mediation within the civil justice system offers the opportunity for a more flexible and affordable way to resolve these disputes. The expansion of the availability of mediation services will widen access to justice for citizens and businesses consistently across the whole of Scotland." Well, that's it for this evening. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who's donated and to everyone who's signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Our need to reach our 30,000 target to pay our bills is still pressing. Due to the generosity of our supporters, we've raised over £20,800. However, our need to raise the remaining 9,200 is really urgent. Good night and thank you for watching.